Okay, so we are going live now. So, good afternoon. We're live on Facebook. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists shortly, but just a couple of things in advance. So we're going to be concentrating today on HR, employment, legal requirements, contracts, anything that I suppose is necessary for employer or employee around that area of legality and human resource expertise. And to do that, I've been joined by two people, and in addition to that, just one notice for us really, which is that whatever we're going to be giving here and talking about, whilst we are answering questions, we are aiming this to be guidance only. And if for any reason you would like to get into more conversation and more detail with regard to your personal circumstances or that of your business, then both Janet and Gail will be more than happy to take those inquiries outside of this particular broadcast. But please do continue to submit any questions that you may have, and we'll try to get them answered. And if you are watching this at the moment, you can also share this video so that other people can see the broadcast. So with all that out of the way, can I come to yourself first, Janet, just because not everybody may know who you are and hasn't possibly been on one of these before. So could you just tell a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure. Hi, my name's Janet. I'm Janet Whitworth from Whitworth Consulting. I've been self-employed for 4 years now. Prior to that, I've held senior posts in the public sector for 20 odd years, finishing up as Chief Operating Officer at the University of Cumbria. So I've been working at a senior level with HR for 25, 30 years now. Since being self-employed, I mainly work with small and medium businesses around the Northwest. People who perhaps have up to 50 or 60 staff but can't afford a full-time in-house HR person. So I provide that extra level of support that they might need if they haven't got in-house HR. And I also do independent investigations and things like that. Okay,
thank you very much. And Gail, may I come up to you next?
Yeah, I am Gail Escolme of Gail Escolme Legal Services. I am a solicitor and I practice only employment law and have done all my legal life, which is many, many years now. And I work for mainly employers. It's about an 80-20 split, employer-employee, in the local area, in the regional area, and in fact, some nationally, because of course, in these days of electronic I can't think of the word. We can deal with things electronically.
And particularly now we're going to
exactly
having to, aren't we?
Yeah.
So that's a really good point that you raised. So both yourself, Gail, and yourself, Janet, are available and able to work remotely to offer advice. So whether that be by video call, telephone conversation, conference call, whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Super.
Yeah.
So with that then, shall we get into some of the questions that we have had? As I say, I'm just going to remind anyone, if you can submit any questions that you may have to us in the comments box. I've got a second screen here that I can see any questions that may come up. And equally, if you want any further details, if you'd like either Janet or Gail to contact you afterwards, you can also request that from us as well. And as I say, do share this particular broadcast as it's going live to allow other people to benefit. So with all of that out of the way, there's two areas now. I know particularly that, I know when we talk about, Janet, you're looking at the HR side of things, and Gail look at the legal side of things. Because of your length of experience and practice, there may be times when you're both able to come together to give a collective answer from both sides of it. So I don't think it's necessarily a fine line we're going to have here of that's a human resource consultancy question.
There's a big area of overlap in the middle, isn't there, Gail?
Huge, yeah, huge.
And also, because of your expertise, you will have both dealt with different aspects of this as they've come across kind of your desk, I suppose, over the last plus years. I'm not going to mention the amount of years. So. Okay. So we have had one question from somebody who was asked that they have a friend who has been furloughed, so therefore that they are not at work, but her boss is making up that 20% so it's making 100%. However, she does some accounts and payroll, and he has contacted her to say he doesn't understand how to do it, and it's only a quick job. And does she think that she could help out and do that? Apparently, she's quite happy to do that, but she's just not sure where she stands legally if that was the case? I suppose that's to both probably, but I mean, I think there are probably two answers, or should I say more than one answer, but probably no, I imagine, Janet.
Do you want me to start? And then I'm sure Gail will want to add to it as well. The guidance that we've got is absolutely clear that if someone is furloughed, they cannot do any work for that employer who's furloughed them. The fact that topping the salary up to the 100% is irrelevant. While they are furloughed, they must not do any work for that employer. And I think it could be quite risky further down the line if HMRC find that the grant has been claimed fraudulently. I think it could lead to prosecution. It could be quite serious. The only thing I could think of to help them out in that situation, if they've already been furloughed for 3 weeks, they could come off furlough, do the payroll, and then be re-furloughed again, because the furlough must be for periods of at least 3 weeks. But it doesn't have to be continuous for sort of 6-10 weeks. You know, you can have repeat periods of furlough as long as each is for 3 weeks. I'll let Gail.
So somebody could technically come off that for a period of time and then go back on, but the employer by that case would only obviously be taking back that, asking for that 3-week payment, not a full payment. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Gail, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that I am aware that I think ACAS have been saying that people have to come back or have a notice of a week to come back, and that's not actually true.
That's
you
correct.
know, they are still employed by the employer, and the employer can ask them to come back really at any time, and they can come back for 1 day and then go off. But as long as each period of furlough is at least 3 weeks, then that's absolutely fine. On the whether she should do the work and the risks involved in that, I am aware that some people are asking, is there a phone line that they can essentially dob people in because they are doing this? And therefore I do think that the risk is growing, because some people think, well, I'm sat here not doing this, why the heck should you be able to get away with it? So I'd be very wary of it, as Janet says.
Yeah, there could be a little bit of curtain twitching happening a bit. On that point, and it was one that I was asked recently, is training and CPD, so continual professional development. What counts within that you're furloughed? So could people do online courses paid for by their workplace? Could they do things that are, I suppose, a betterment, that they are improving, but they could be considered work, or they could be considered personal? What would your view be there, Janet?
Well, I'm not sure if you wanted to take this one, Gail. Was this?
It's fine. I'm happy for you to take.
Yeah. Yes, they can is the short answer. They can do work-related training, online courses, anything like that. The only proviso is if they are furloughed at less than national minimum wage. If they actually do the training, you must top up to at least minimum wage.
Okay. And what would be the circumstance where they would be below that minimum wage? Would that be because of that?
If you were on minimum wage anyway, and then you were furloughed, you would only be getting paid 80% of national minimum wage, because you're not working. The legal requirement to pay national minimum wage doesn't apply. But if you do the training, you must pay at least national minimum wage. A lot of apprentices might fall into that category.
Yeah, because they'll have apprentices currently that need to log off the job learning and all of those things as part of their apprenticeship, but doing that would constitute working, and I suppose that's that crossover of so that is allowed, that can happen and can continue.
Yeah.
Okay, Gail, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think it just highlights the point that employees can be paid under the minimum wage on the 80%, and also that the new update of the minimum wage that comes in April, if employees were furloughed and it's taken back from the 19th of March, then it's on the old minimum wage, and the employers don't have to increase at the moment while people are furloughed.
Okay, so when you say, so just to be really clear, so that when the new minimum wage comes in,
it's in
still furloughed, they're still going to remain on that amount prior.
Yeah.
Janet, go. Yeah.
80% of the old wage. It's the last pay that they got before they were furloughed. So if they were furloughed from the 1st of March, it'll be the February pay. If they were furloughed later, perhaps in April, then it could be the March pay, but it won't have gone up obviously to the new national minimum wage, because that came in from the 6th of April.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if we move on, we've got a couple of questions. So Wendy Jones asks, what happened if my staff can't be furloughed when I thought they would be able to? What are my alternatives? We may need a little bit more detail around why they can't be furloughed, I'd imagine.
Yeah, there's fairly limited circumstances where you can't furlough. Perhaps if they were newly taken on after the 19th of March, that might be a circumstance. If they can't be furloughed and you haven't got work for them, you'd probably have to discuss with them if there's anything like unpaid leave that they'd be prepared to take. They might be able to claim universal credit. It really is, it's not a great situation. It's one where I would take advice, talk to them and just try and see if there is anything you can do over the intervening period until they can come back to work.
Okay. And I know from the conversation we've had before, Janet, your first kind of bit of advice always around these situations is talk to them. It's always around talking to them first, isn't it? Yes. So Wendy's just confirmed that they missed that 19th of March deadline. So yeah. Okay. So therefore, Wendy.
There's one other potential circumstance. I have had one where the old employer that they'd left, they were on good terms with, and they have re-employed them and furloughed them. So it does depend on the relationships, but that's a possibility they could explore.
Okay. And is there a possibility where if those conversations had been taking place beforehand, there was some evidence that that job was being offered, there was a whole host of communication and correspondence, so it doesn't look as though someone's just kind of hooked them off the street?
It's not that. It's when the last real-time information went through to HMRC.
Oh, yeah, right.
So it's a hard and fast rule.
Okay. And we know they like those. So
yeah.
And just to say that if the old employer did agree to furlough, the old employer's got to remember that they would take on the holidays, etc., that would still accrue, and possibly continuous service, which may tip them over into a new year or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then another person, Sue, has asked, one of my new employees started the 28th of Feb, can't be furloughed because we do RTI monthly. RTI, yes. And missed the 19th deadline. Do you think that this may be changed going forward potentially?
No, I doubt it.
They've just changed it once from the 28th of Feb to the 19th.
I don't think they'll change it again.
No.
Okay.
Because, and the reason for that is for those people that would have jumped on the bandwagon, because this all started on that date, they're stopping people from saying, oh, well, I'm employing my wife or my brother or whatever, and he was really employed, because they're just jumping on it because all this happened.
Yes, because there could be a scenario, not suggesting for a second there would be, where somebody has employed a vast, well, not a vast, but a few people at that 80%, and therefore is going to be claiming that, and it's preventing that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's after the fact. It's really jumping on the coronavirus bandwagon rather than bona fide people. And I feel very sorry for them, those people that have missed out. But there's got to be a cut-off point somewhere. And unfortunately, they get caught within that.
Okay. And I think on that point about investigations and about kind of, looking back at this when we are hopefully out of the woods and it's a year or so ahead, I've had a few people say to me, well, we're not going to look at us. We're only a small business. And I think, well, HMRC do have powers of investigation, don't they? Not wishing to scaremonger or frighten anybody, but I'm presuming that if emails are going backwards and forwards and work is taking place, if they were so inclined, they would, I presume, be able to request.
I think the computer matching, they've got the RTI information, that's the real-time information that people submit on payroll at the moment. They'll be able to look at a comparison. If people have claimed more than 80% of what their normal RTI return is, I think that's going to flag up. Yeah. And so they won't have to have a huge resource to sort out the ones that look like they need further investigation. It'll be done by computer matching.
And then equally, though, people that are working whilst furloughed, again, that would be quite straightforward for them to be able to look at that, I presume, would it not? And I don't know whether, Gail, from your experience, these kind of things do happen. I mean, I know we haven't had this instance happen before, but investigations of types.
Yeah, I think there'll be spot checking. I think obviously there isn't a resource to check all of them. I mean, it's just going to be massive. But I agree with Janet, as far as the numbers are concerned, that's very easily checkable. And I think they will spot check some businesses particularly if somebody is whistleblown on them, for example, and said, I believe this is going on. I think then they might be looking. So act in good faith, use some common sense at times, because sometimes the direction and the guidance don't always match. Just do your best and use your common sense. But if you act in good faith, then you're not really going to go that far wrong.
Okay. And if someone is a company director and they're going to furlough themselves, I mean, we have answered this question before, but it's worth clarifying again, isn't it? What are the statutory obligations, or what are they allowed to do under the terms of their legal responsibilities?
Yeah, well, no income generating work, so no marketing, sales calls, any of the normal work that they would do. This is if they're a limited company director. They can furlough themselves and claim 80% of what they got through payroll, but not including any dividends in that. They are allowed to do things like statutory returns that they must do, like filing their accounts or filling in person of control letters, that kind of thing. So things that are required as a director of a limited company by statute that you've got to do, but no income generating work.
Okay. And are they able to go and get work elsewhere if they wished to do so?
Yes.
Yes, if they are contractually allowed, which I would say most limited company directors will be, but this applies to anybody. As you know, there's lots of places that have been recruiting, particularly like the supermarkets. What I would say to anybody who's thinking of taking additional work or that kind of work on, just check your employment contract if you've got one, and check that you are allowed to work for another employer, because while you're furloughed, you are actually, you still have a duty of care to your current employer.
So where there might be some form of competition in an area or any non-disclosure or anything of that nature, they can't really take anything that might put in jeopardy the confidence, security.
I would say talk to your employer if you're not sure, and then check that it's okay, because quite a lot of employment contracts say no working for other employers without our prior written agreement.
Okay.
So it's not that they will necessarily say no. I'm sure lots of employers will be understanding in the circumstances, but you don't want to find yourself out of work from your main job because you've breached your contract.
Guys, have you got anything else that would add to that in terms of employers? Have you seen that response to those kind of inquiries? Or
no, not a great deal is coming through. I mean, most people are furloughed in any event, and my experience is that most people are quite happy to be, well, I say happy, they are sitting being furloughed rather than going out and looking for other work. And in fact, some people, I do know that some employees have tried to find other work, and in fact, all the supermarkets are pretty well stocked with people at the moment because there's been so many people looking for that work. But I agree entirely with Janet about talking to the employer. Just because it says in your contract you can't work for others, and probably without our permission, then just talk to your employer. And most of them, unless there's a really cogent reason for a non-competition reason, because you're going to go and work for their direct competitor, they're likely to say yes.
okay, thank you. And then we'll have another one. I'm not sure whether we will be able to, but we have a couple. So Sue's asked, not sure if you can cover this, but could you offer any advice or about accommodation not refunding payments? We have offered to change dates, but we'd like to the legal case to do so. Probably not something that we can cover in this. That's more of a consumer law that needs.
Yeah, sorry, not my area of expertise at all.
No. As a sole director, I can furlough and be paid 80%, but do no work. So we've got statutory duties. I know we did mention them just slightly there, but I think we'll just have to put a little bit of clarification here in terms of what are, very plainly in the list, what would be those statutory duties, and where would we be at risk of encroaching on something that is not?
Well, certainly nothing that you would invoice for, absolutely not. I think it gets into a grayer area if you talk about, well, networking, for example, doing Zoom networking meetings or talking to clients. The guidance I've seen, and Gail might be able to go further on this, said no marketing. So for me, that would rule out actually proactively contacting clients or say really it comes under that any work that would be income generating. So you couldn't sort of go through a list of contacts ringing up to see if they want any work doing when you're back at work.
Yeah, I agree with that. The actual guidance says where furlough directors need to carry out particular duties to fulfil the statutory obligations they owe to their company, they may do so, provided they do no more than would be reasonably be judged necessary for that purpose. They should not do work of any kind that would carry out in normal circumstances to generate commercial revenue or provide services to or on behalf of the company. So it's quite strict. It's only that necessary to carry out the statutory duties.
And it's different for the self-employed scheme. As you'll know, there's a separate scheme for people who are self-employed, not directors of limited companies. They are allowed to continue to work. So it is a bit of an inequity there, and people don't quite understand that.
Yeah.
So replying to somebody who wants a quote for something, ultimately could be argued that that's a revenue generating aspect of a business.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, a couple of other ones then. Can employees who have childcare issues ask to be furloughed?
Yes.
Yeah, they can ask, but the employer doesn't have to allow them to be. It will very much depend on whether there is work there. If work there is there to be done, then the employer can insist that the employee comes in and does it. And if the employee can't, and they're not furloughing anybody else, then they would have to come to some arrangement about unpaid leave or use of holidays or something. It may be that the employer agrees to furlough, but they don't have to. Okay.
What would be reasonable in terms of adjustment? So somebody's having to go work from home. So as you've rightly said, the employer says, actually, no, we're not furloughing you because that job and that work is needing to be done. They can't necessarily make them go somewhere, I suppose, it's at risk, or can they? Or could they just offer them an alternative method of which to work, be it setting up at home and doing all of that? So it's around, how does that balance? Because there's been a lot in the paper, hasn't there, around?
Yeah, it is very difficult, and some people are genuinely anxious about their health or health of people that they're close to. And I have got clients where they are sort of full on working still, like a care home, and they do need people in, but there does need to be a balance. So even within the care home, they have furloughed some people who have got very young children, can't, the nurseries have closed, they really genuinely can't come into work. It's obviously not feasible for them to work from home, as it's, the work is with the patients the residents in a care home. As Gail said earlier, there's no statutory reason why an employer must pay somebody to be at home with the children. Some employers do have contractual clauses where they will allow perhaps up to 5 days for emergency childcare that might be paid as special leave. So it's worth looking at your contract to see. You can probably negotiate unpaid leave, although again, if the employer needs you in, it can be difficult. If the employee is just anxious about coming into work, you need to try and reassure them as best you can, tell them what you're doing about social distancing, disinfection, trying to make sure that people aren't congregating in common areas. And I have seen that with 1 or 2 clients where people have just been frightened to come to work. But ultimately, if they just choose to stay at home, then they may well be on unpaid leave. The employer can furlough people if they are shielding, if they're in the high risk area. But if they're not sick and they just don't want to come to work, if you think about it, furlough hasn't changed the whole field of employment law. What would happen normally if somebody just said, I don't want to come to work? But I'd always suggest you try and talk to your employer and try and reach an amicable solution if you can.
Yeah, and I would add to that what employers mustn't do in those circumstances is discipline or terminate the employment.
Yeah, definitely.
It's all right not to pay them if they won't work, but it would be an automatic unfair dismissal. So regardless of how many years service they've got in, they could bring a claim against the employer for the health and safety reasons set out in the Employment Rights Act 1996.
Yeah. And they'd probably be in breach of contract as well. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. We've had a further question from Nicola, just going back to the direct query, what you can and can't do. Does social media, for example, promotion form part of that statutory duties or not to be able to be done? Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because it is potentially, you could say that they are marketing, and if they're marketing by social media.
I would suggest as well that they need to be careful because there is a permanent record of what they've done there.
Yeah.
Which is very visible to others.
Yes.
It perhaps depends who's doing it, mind. If they have a contract with, not an employment contract, but a contract with a marketing firm to do that,
Yeah.
and they were doing it on their behalf, that might be a way around.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah. Certainly from our point of view as a business, we provide that service and we are all working. So the employer can, the business person could absolutely, or business owner could show without question that work was being done by somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we make employees redundant whilst they are furloughed? These are not the happiest of questions, but let's get through them.
The ones we're dealing with, I think the short answer is yes, although the job retention scheme is designed to try and avoid redundancies where possible. It is certainly possible to start the consultation on redundancy while people are furloughed. Ultimately, you could actually make somebody redundant during the furlough period, although a few employers that I've worked with are they're planning for redundancy, not wholesale, but they will have to cut the workforce back at the end of this. So they've started consultation now, but they won't actually make anybody redundant until we get to the end of the furlough period. They'll carry on as long as they can with the 80%. If they do get to a point where they are doing redundancies, perhaps because the company is going under, if they do notice while they're on furlough, they have to pay that at 100% rather than 80%.
And presumably, in a situation like this, redundancy is a delicate enough area as it is. Different notice periods for different size of employees, for different consultation groups, and all of those aspects. Then add in the additional of furlough and COVID and everything else. So
I would suggest they need to take advice.
Yeah.
And yeah, if there's a lot of redundancies, there are notifications to trade and industry. There are collective consultation requirements. Different requirements kick in with different numbers in a time scale. So they might not need an awful lot of advice, but before they start, I would recommend that they do get some advice.
Yeah, just to add to that they should start consultation when they are contemplating redundancies. So if they are actually contemplating redundancies, they should start the consultation now. It may finish at the end of the furlough period, but they can be consulting in that period while people are furloughed.
Okay, thank you. Another couple of questions. So can I rotate the staff that are on furlough? We probably have touched upon this in terms of that 3 weeks before. So are we presuming yes, if they were doing this 3 week space and window, is it legal? I mean, they can do it, but is it also legally acceptable, I suppose, is the question.
It is, as long as the selection of who is going to be furloughed is done on a fair and reasonable basis. So working out who's going to be furloughed and who's not should be fair and to meet business needs. It shouldn't discriminate against anybody on the grounds of disability, for example, or any other protected characteristic.
But actually in these circumstances, it could turn itself round. If you think about it, that you might be furloughing people that are shielding or have childcare issues, etc. And I think the business need there, it would be understandable in these circumstances.
I think that would be a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, which is a phrase that HR people use when they want to do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Should employers take account of the increase in the national minimum wage when paying an employee on furlough? So I know we've covered some of these already, but I think it is worth, just in case people are joining at different times. So
yeah, I think when they look at the guidance online, it's quite clear which pay period they've got to look at, and it's the one before national minimum wage increased. So I think no, they won't be looking at the increase.
Okay. So we've looked at one that's very similar already. How do I deal with holidays being accrued during furlough?
Right, we have had some of the guidance, as you know, it changes at least once a week. And this was an area we were waiting for some clarification on because it wasn't very clear at all what was going to happen. We knew holidays would continue to accrue while somebody was on furlough, but it wasn't clear whether somebody could take holiday while they were on furlough. That has now been clarified that they can, but you must pay 100% if they're taking holiday while they're on furlough. An employer can tell somebody they want them to take some of the holidays while they're on furlough, providing they pay 100%, but they must give them double the notice. So if they want to take a week off, they've got to give them 2 weeks notice.
Okay.
But they can allow people just to accrue the holidays, and then when they come back to work, look for when they're going to take them then. And the working time directive has been, requirements have been relaxed so that people can carry forward the statutory part of the holiday, the 4 weeks for up to 2 years. So you can space it out a bit. They're not going to be coming back to work with a whole load of holiday to be taken in a very short time.
Okay.
Just to add to that the employee can't insist on taking those holidays over. It's got to have been reasonably practicable that they couldn't take them because of coronavirus in this holiday period. So it's not just about stacking them all up and taking them over. There's got to be a reason why they couldn't take them.
Why they couldn't take them for. Okay. And probably one for yourself. Well, either or, but I'm going to start with Gail for the answer. So Wendy has come back and said, okay, so if I can't furlough, and this was in reference to the person having started after the 19th of March.
Yeah.
So if I can't furlough, what is the status of the contract of employment? Is it broken is the phrase that she's used, but it's not, is it?
No, it's not.
Carries on.
We use a word called frustration in employment law, and it's been looked at whether contracts will be frustrated in these circumstances. No, they wouldn't be. The contract remains, and unless they've got a contractual right to put them on short time working or lay them off, and that's only for a short period of time, then in fact that contract carries on, and ostensibly they must pay them. And if they haven't got the money to pay them, they need to come to some arrangement with them as to what happens.
Okay.
Janet?
Same, yeah, nothing to add to that.
So potentially this is going back to this point about, do they want to take a period of unpaid leave? Are they happy to come to that agreement between them? Can they? So it's that accommodating or conversation and dialogue first before there's any drastic resolution.
And, you know, we're banding these words about. We recognise it's really difficult in those circumstances for both the employer and the employee, because, you know, the employer would have rather furloughed and the employee is possibly left with no money because the employer can't afford to pay them. And that is a really difficult situation, but we can only tell you about the legalities of it.
Of course. Okay. How do I calculate the amount to claim back from the government is a question.
Well, there's some guidance. I'm just looking for the, can I hold this up? That's the one you want to look for on gov.uk. Perhaps we can put the link up later, but it actually has worked examples of how to calculate the amount that you claim back as the grant. If somebody's on a fixed salary, you know, they get the same amount every month, you work out a daily rate. So you look at how much they got, whether it was February or March, depending on when they were furloughed, divide that by 29 if it was February, 31 if it was March, to get a daily rate, and then you multiply that by the number of days they've been furloughed, and then you multiply that to get your 80% of that figure, recognising of course it's capped at 2,500 per month. But there is step-by-step worked instructions in that document on gov.uk. It also helps if you've got people who get irregular earnings that don't get the same every month. There you've got to look at the higher of either 80% of their February or March wages, depending when they were furloughed, against 80% of their average wages in the 2019-2020 tax year. So you work out which is the highest of those two figures, then apply the same formula, and 80% again capped at 2,500. It sounds very complicated. It is quite complicated, but the worked examples are quite good. So the first time I read it, I thought my brain hurts. And the second time I read it, it seemed to make a bit more sense. And I've read it a few times since, so it does get easier.
You could almost track your calculation against that written, calculation. Yeah.
The only concern I have there is I'm aware of some people that have had the experience of using the calculator to put through the worked examples and it didn't come to the same answer, which was slightly concerning. I think they took the calculator down and I think they put it back up, so I'm hoping that works better now. But also, if you're using the calculator for employees where you top up to 100%, they can't cope with that at the moment, and they say you'll have to come back, a future version will deal with that.
And we were talking, I actually have two questions here, because we were talking about this earlier in terms of there is a time limit to get some of these claims in, isn't there? There's a window.
In the last half hour, they've just said that if you want to be paid back, reimbursed by the end of April, you must get your claim in today. So if you want the money to come in by the end of April, it should go in today. If you don't need the money by the end of April, don't feel, you know, time pressed to do that, because it's important to get it right. But if you need that money to come in by the end of April, you need to get that claim in today.
But it will remain open for tomorrow and the day after. It's just that they are going to promise to them to be paid during that time scale.
Yeah.
And then the other question I have is people that are on commissions, because there's a difference between where it's in the contract and where they can earn commissions and bonus, isn't there? And I'm not going to suggest I know too much about this, but I wondered, Gail, if you've had, or either, I'd say anything that you can add to that, because there are people who have, a sales job and they have a very kind of moderate basic, because they have the ability to earn to such a greater degree from a commission perspective. Do you have any thoughts about that at all?
Yeah, I think initially it was thought that these things weren't included, but they are, because if it's in your salary every week, then they would probably be different, so it'd be variable. So again, you'd go back to what Janet said, it's either the same month last year that you go off, or you take the average over the 52 weeks. But certainly if it's in the contract that they get commission, then they're entitled to be paid for it. Okay,
so that calculation of this 80% that Janet walked us through, that starting figure would be with commission.
Yes, because it's variable. So you would look at, again, what they earned in March or April last year, or an average over the 52 weeks, and that includes the commission.
Okay. I think it's anything that comes under remuneration. So what would they expect to receive as remuneration? And they would, of course, expect to receive their basic salary and their commission.
Okay. I imagine there's quite a few people that are very relieved to hear that, because it's a huge difference, isn't it? Or it can.
Absolutely. But don't forget that is capped at £2,500.
Yeah. Okay. We may have asked some of these already, so forgive me, but I just want to make sure. So we've had Sue's asked around, can I ask my staff to take holidays? We have mentioned this, haven't we? So from an employer's point of view, rather than the employee's point of view this time, what would the advice be from you both in terms of how that's positioned with a member of staff?
I would say employers can always ask staff to take holidays. Again, as Janet said previously, as long as you give twice as much notice as the amount of holidays that they need to take, and it was always the case that and they can take it by the end of the holiday year, then the employer can tell you when the employee should take the holidays. That's slightly different now because there is this extension of the 2-year period, but still it is the case that employers can ask the employees to take holidays. And in fact, in some ways, why wouldn't you as an employer, if you're on furlough and the government is going to pay 80% of those holidays and you're only going to pay 20%, it's a way of getting some holidays taken at a lesser cost to you, the employer.
As long as you can manage the cash flow at the moment. Absolutely. I think that's the only proviso. I have had
oh, sorry, Janet.
I was going to say, I have had a client who asked me, he said he was worried when they did go back to work, it would take 3 to 6 months for money to start flowing back into the company, because it was a property related business and that's the lead time. And he asked whether or not he could say to staff, you can't take any holidays for the first 3 months when you're back, because he really needed them in and working to get the cash coming back into the business. And I advised him to talk to them, as I always do, but to flag it up now. Yes, he can do that, but the best thing he can do is to make people aware that that's going to be the case, so they don't start planning holidays for then. And of course, as we've just said, he might want them to take some of their holidays now, providing he gives them appropriate notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because ultimately people are accruing holiday, aren't they, all of this period of time? So operationally, so there's a financial aspect, of course there's also an operational point, which is when everything goes back and it's full steam ahead, operationally there'll be a whether that is a quota of people that need to be available, and therefore there'll have to be arrangements around holidays and entitlement. And so really your advice would be, now would be a good time to try and agree some of that holiday entitlement. What if an employee says, no, I'm not, I'm on furlough and why do I need to take my holiday?
Well, so As we said before, you can actually tell employees when they've got to take their holiday, providing you give them double the notice. It's never a good idea to dictate to employees when they're going to take all their holiday. That never goes down very well. But I think, you know, if you were trying now just to avoid the fact that they might come back with a lot of holiday accrued, it would not be unreasonable to dictate that they might take a week now, providing you're going to pay the 100%. That would be within the employer's rights. But overall, you're trying to strike the balance with the employees.
Okay, so I've got a question from Laura. It's quite a while. It may touch on areas we can answer, it may not. This is regards to childcare. I'm due back to work after my maternity, but the childcare provider we have decided on has now closed, as they had to, I think it says, oh yes, because they have children of key workers or what can I do regarding childcare as a family was supposed to be helping? So I think ultimately what she's asking there is you going back to work, would it be reasonable to say I'm going to have to delay my start back because my childcare provision is not what it was? I mean, what would be your advice?
It may be worth her talking to her employer, because her employer might be happy for her to return theoretically on an agreed date and then immediately furlough her. And a furlough would be against a full salary, not a maternity pay.
Right.
So that might work. She may also have accrued holidays from while she's been on maternity leave. So again, talking to the employer, it might be possible to take some of those holidays and be paid 100% for that period. I had a third option that it's just gone through my mind. I'll let Gail come in and then I might remember what it was I was trying to think as a third option.
There might be, if she's required to go back to work and it's a work where she can work from home, then even though she's got childcare issues obviously at home, it may be that they can amend the hours that she works, so she may be able to work some hours in the evenings. That all very much depends obviously on whether the work she does is work she can do from home. But definitely speak to the employer to see what's going on. Presumably she's got to the end of her maternity leave period. If she hadn't and she was looking to go back, she could go back and be furloughed if they'd agree, and then possibly go on to shared parental leave to take the rest of her maternity, because if you come off maternity, you can't go back on maternity if you haven't finished it all. You would have to go to shared parental leave.
Okay.
I've remembered the third option. She might want to change the return date with the employer, but she'd have to give the employer 8 weeks notice if she wanted to vary that date. If
Unless
it was
they agree
to the year. Yeah.
Unless they agree to less.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a quick question that I just want to answer back to that. So not a HR question. Does anyone know about the grey area for businesses where rates are included in rent, therefore can't claim the grant? Has anyone heard if this is being looked into? I've been asked this question a few times, and any guidance I've taken is no, it's not being.
Yeah, I've not heard anything of any assistance there.
Okay. And another question is, I know someone who has a 0 hours contract but has done many hours weekly over the last year. They have been asked to be furloughed but received no response at all from the employer. What can they do?
Obviously try again to contact the employer. 0 hours contracts can be furloughed, so I don't know.
But they don't have to be.
It's the employer's decision ultimately, not the employee's decision. It's the employer's decision. Have they got work? Is it a means of avoiding redundancy? So the employer decides whether or not to furlough employees. But I would think the employer should at least be responding to the request, either whether it's positive or negative. It would be polite to let the employee know. Then the employee can, if they're not going to be furloughed and they've no income, at least they could go and claim universal credit when they'd got the confirmation from the employer.
Okay. Gail, anything else from you to add to that one?
No, I mean, of course, the employer would have holidays, etc., to pay on the 80% hours, and that might be putting them off. But I mean, it just depends how good your employer is, I suppose, as to whether they're willing to do that, or whether they know there isn't going to be work going forward, and therefore it's a genuine cut-off at this point. There is not going to be any further work.
Okay. And a question around recruiting and bringing people in. So, for example, somebody doesn't form part of prior to or after the 19th of March. They're probably due to start a job in April or May, and at this point the business isn't in full operation. wanting to make sure that they have that they've taken, I'm trying to think of the word, that they match their responsibility, but they have no work for them. Is that a case of that they literally bring them in, start their employment, and then they can't furlough them because they don't get the contribution? So can there be some mediation there where they can ask if the employee potential is able to extend their start date, or what would the advice be?
Voluntary discussion and voluntary agreement is definitely the best way forward. Perhaps they might vary the start date. If you've got limited work available, you might be able to agree reduced hours, anything like that. A lot depends on the circumstances of the individual who is going to start and can't, because for some people to claim benefits, it's better if they've got the clarity. They might agree that the job start date has been put back 2 months and have written confirmation of that. It would be easier for them to make a benefit claim on universal credit than a rather vague situation. So for a lot of people, they're willing to talk. The employer and the employee can talk, and they can come to a resolution. It's trying to work out what works for both parties. But Gail might want to say something about the contractual side of, there is a job offer, it's a contract.
Absolutely, offer and acceptance. If the job's been offered and it's been accepted, then a contract exists, and therefore just to say there is no job for you would lead the employer to potentially be in breach of contract. Yeah. Quite as the employee, if they said I'm not coming anymore, that, you know, that could have the same consequences, although really what's the loss that flows from that? I think I have had a couple of employers where this has happened with more senior members of staff, and what they've done, because they've had the resources, to bring them in as one of their key workers, and they've added a lot to the business to keep it going whilst, you know, many of them have been furloughed. So they have paid them, but they've got their pound of flesh out of them almost from the minute that they hit the ground running. So it depends what they can bring to the party, I think, but very much if you can come to an agreement, anything that can be agreed is fine.
And just probably get the agreement in writing, even if it's only an email.
Always, everything, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just going to the last couple of questions now. Somebody's a key worker, so both parents are key workers. Can't provide childcare; it's closed, and they have relatives that are not able to take the children on to be able to look after them. So, in that instance, is that just a case of finding a provider that's open to key workers and making a different decision for childcare? Or are they able to have that conversation with an employer that same conversation, which is, I just can't make this work. There isn't anything available.
I think it is, as we said earlier when I mentioned the care home, you know, if you've got employees who are key workers, but they've got childcare responsibilities, they can't find any other means. I would suggest if both partners are key workers, both speak to the employer and see if one will agree to furlough on that basis. That's probably going to be the best outcome.
Or they find a way where their hours are changed so that they can cover the childcare between them.
Yeah.
So it may be that, you know, they can both adjust their hours so that the full 24 hours, if you like, is covered for childcare.
Okay. And then I'm just looking at the questions. I think we've pretty much gone through most. Employees be made redundant, employees on sick leave. Yes, it very much looks as though we've covered most of those. Are there any particular points that you're hearing more of more recently that we haven't asked you about that you would think you'd kind of want to mention? Are there any kind of do's and don'ts or to be awares potentially?
I think for me, it's just be very careful when you're claiming the furlough money back, the 80% back, that you get it right. Don't rush into it. Everybody needs the money, so there's a little bit of pressure there, but don't let that pressure make you make a false or erroneous claim because you can't correct it later. Take your time, speak to your payroll provider if you've got one, or double check with the guidance online. Get somebody else who you know to have a look at it and double check it that you've done your sums right before you submit it. Lots of years of experience I'm a farmer's wife and doing the online claims for the single farm payment. Most years it nearly causes divorce. So, you know, I recommend take your time, try and stay cool, double check the figures before you press the button to submit.
Okay, thank you. Gail, anything else from yourself?
Ultimately, I think I said this last time, just, remember that both sides are under great pressure here, the employers and the employees, and that anything that can be agreed between them is always best. It's very rare that people are doing things just to be bolshy or just to be awkward or not to help. So there may be reasons, and both, you don't know what the circumstances are on both sides. So always try and come to some agreement. But if ultimately you don't know what to do, or there's a situation that you need to deal with, take advice, get the advice and make sure that you're getting it right so that claims aren't coming later down the line. Okay.
And in terms of, just to finish up, I'm going to ensure that all of your contact details are in the intro to here. So everyone will be able to see the website, the contact details, email and so on. If somebody does want to come to you for help and guidance at this point, do you have a preferred method of contact? Would you rather the phone, the email, or how would you best wish to do that?
Phone or email, don't mind. Quite happy. I'll offer 30 minutes free to anybody who needs support or advice.
Yeah. Absolutely mirror that. Offer 30 minutes free, and phone, email. If they want a Zoom meeting, that's absolutely fine too.
Okay. Someone's just snuck in with a last minute question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We're anticipating a phased start back for furloughed employees. Is there an agreed criteria for who would go back to work first?
I think it comes back to what I say, it's like reversing what we said about selecting people for furlough. You've got to be fair and reasonable about it. You wouldn't want to discriminate against any group. It's a good idea to give people as much notice as possible, although as Gail said, the ACAS advice that you had to give them 5 days notice was wrong. You don't. I would suggest if you're writing to them regularly anyway, give them as much notice as you can to be prepared to come back, so that when you do know the exact date, you can tell people at fairly short notice, right, it's Monday, we want you back. Okay. And try and reassure people about what you're doing to maintain their health once they are back as well.
Yeah. What I would say is that you need to look at operationally what you need for people to come back, because, if it's coming back phase, there'll be reasons why one lot of people have to come back before another lot of people. Just make a note of that as you're making the decision, and just keep that note on file so that if ever you're challenged about it, you can say, well, these were the reasons why I made that decision.
So that's really about being able to evidence that there was a process behind that selection and decision.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so Janet, people are able to contact you by phone or by email, and you're happy to offer 30 minutes free in terms of consultation to help people. And Gail, much the same, by email or by phone. And again, you very kindly said that you will give a 30-minute free advice consultation.
Absolutely.
So all your details are sat on the introduction to this session. It just kind of remains to say thank you very much for giving up your time and giving us your expertise and your guidance. We very much appreciate it. So
thank you, Ruth.
No problem. Thanks, Ruth.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.